Today we have a special guest with us, Dr. Wesley Britton, who knows all about spies in media, including the details of the real-life spy movie, The Impossible Spy, a movie based on the espionage part of the life of a real Israeli spy, Elie Cohen. So let's find out how impossible this real spy was. Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Join us now as we decode this real-life drama. Wes, welcome to our show.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate stopping by.
Yeah, this is going to be great talking to you. Wes, we want to get the background and understand the groundwork that went into making this movie before Tom and I continue to decode it. So first I want to give a little background on you. Dr. Wesley Britton is the host of the online radio show and podcast Flashback with Wes Britton, has been involved in the worlds of real and fictional spies for over 20 years now. It began with his 3 books of Prager publishers beginning in 2004, the much-acclaimed spy television, Beyond Bond, Spies in Fiction and Film, and On Screen and Undercover, the ultimate book of movie espionage. Then came his encyclopedia of TV spies for Bear Manor Media. Wes's website, SpyWiseSecretDossier.com, is a massive treasury of interviews, articles, reviews, and even full books on spies in films, spies in history and literature, spies on television, and deep dives into the world of 007, so check that out. All right, here we go, Wes. The Impossible Spy is a poignant story based on real-life, thoroughly researched events that happened in the early 1960s. It's not a documentary, as there are actors playing real-life roles. It's more of a docudrama, but fundamentally a very accurate representation of what happened to an Israeli citizen, Elie Cohen, who was recruited by Mossad to be a spy. Wes, tell us how you grew to be so close to this story, how you got to know the executive producer, Harvey Chertok, his wife, Bobby, and what transpired and how.
Well, I got involved with the story back in 2005, I guess it was, when I was doing research on my second book, Beyond Bond, and I was going around trying to find out everything I possibly could about spy movies. And I went into a Starlight video store in Dallas, Texas, and I knew the owner, and he knew what I was looking for, and he says, I've got 2 for you today. One is this one over here, The Impossible Spy, and over here is Pascali's Island. He was right on both counts. Those are 2 really good movies. Well, I took The Impossible Spy home and I wrote up about it in Beyond Bond. And then in 2006, the International Spy Museum called me and asked if I'd come to a second program. I'd done one on spy television. We did a slideshow. And the director of education says, we don't want to do another slideshow. Can you suggest a good movie with the historical context that would fit for our museum? I went, oh, yeah, The Impossible Spy. So I showed up to do my presentation, and not only did they have The Impossible Spy, they had the film's producer, Harvey Chertok, and his wife, Bobby, were there. And we met, we sat, and we talked, and we became fast friends. And we remained friends until Harvey's death back in February, doing different things together over the years for The Impossible Spy. Harvey always said that night at the Spy Museum kind of kicked in the renaissance of The Impossible Spy, because from that screening on, he went up and down the next couple of years, the East Coast, showing TIS, as he always called it, TIS, to film festivals, to conferences, from New Jersey to New York to Florida. And is always about trying to raise interest in people to sign the petition at the Friends of Elie Cohen website to get people to write to Syria and request that they return the body of Elie Cohen to Israel, which they hadn't done, still haven't done. That was his. One of my favorites of those was he brought the movie to Penn State for a showing, and he called me up, and I came up, and there he had Eli Wallach, who would play the spy master
Wow.
Myra Mitt. So I got to have dinner with Eli Wallach and chat about stuff. And in 2006, Maurice Cohen, who was Eli's one of youngest brothers, started to work on his memoirs. He wanted to assemble a team to help him do it. Boy, he needed help, all right. There was a group of us that gathered at a friend's house in Princeton, New Jersey. including Harvey, Maurice, and me, and some other folks. And we were all trying to figure out what to do with Maurice's memoirs. The upshot is that everybody else in the project dropped out except me. Ended up with all of Maurice's records, his memoirs, all the things. And man, it was a mess. I edited it down, and to this day, you can see the results at my Spywise Secret Dossier website in the Spies and History and Literature section. And Harvey has always said that's just about the best place online you can find info on Elie Cohen, because it's massive. It's got a whole lot of then new information from Maurice, which was then added to by Elie's youngest brother, Abraham. I started the correspondence and phone calls with him for a long time, getting a lot of his perspectives and stuff that hadn't been heard before and nobody knew about before. So the Elie Cohen files grew and grew and grew. They came on, and still, I'm rather proud of it, to be perfectly honest.
They should be.
Just 4 or 5 years ago, I get a call from Al Jazeera Television. They say that they're going to do a documentary on Elie Cohen. I wanted to know if I'd participate. Well, yeah, I can. So they took 2 of their folks up here. We set up in a living room here, and they interviewed me for, I guess, about an hour or so. And you can see it now. It's Elie Cohen, Mossad's Agent 88, I think it's called. In fact, I saw it the other day because I was looking at the reports of Elie Cohen's artifacts that the Syria sent to Israel. And after one of the news broadcasts was that particular documentary. And I always think it's kind of funny because I'm the only English speaker in it.
Wow.
Everybody else, speaking, I guess, Israeli and Arabic or whatever.
Yeah. So
I need somebody with eyes on to read me the credits, all those captions.
Right.
So that was kind of a really interesting feather in my cap, I do think.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And heck, you guys call, so it just never ends. There's always something. In the story of the Wesley Britton and the Impossible Spy.
It's a fascinating story.
It is, and you mentioned something there because Elie Cohen's back in the news again because a bunch of his documents were returned or taken. The reports are kind of different as to whether it was given or if the Mossad went and got it.
Oh, I think it's pretty much given that Syria returned them.
Okay.
His 2,500 documents and artifacts, like his apartment keys and what all, but they were basically trying to appease Donald Trump. They're trying to get in good with the international community, which they had been out of with Hafez in there for 65 years. They decided, okay, it's time. 60 years since Elie was executed. It's not like, of course, the other side of that is the Mossad classified Elie's mission, 40 years ago, I guess it was, and then turned around and reclassified it for another 40 years.
Wow.
So everything the Mossad's got, we're not going to see in our lifetime, probably. But the Syrian cache I'd like to see what the Mossad releases so that we can see it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying Mossad now has it, and they'll keep it a secret for 40 years?
I don't know what they're going to do with it.
Oh, okay. So we might see it.
We might see it, or dribs and drabs, because they've been always, like for Elie's youngest brother, Abraham, got some documents over the years from the Mossad, but very few, and not much. The Mossad and the Cohen family have been kind of at odds ends and back and forth forever. Especially in Nadia. She does not get along with the Mossad very well at all. That's Elie's widow, for those of you who don't know.
Right, yeah. And why is that? It seemed like they should have been close.
Well, a big part of it was Elie's last mission. They both disagree on the Mossad. Myra Mitt was his boss. And Nadia, they both disagree on whether or not Elie should have gone back for that last mission. According to Nadia, Elie wanted out. He was ready to come home. And according to Mossad, no, he was not done yet. And the reasons for that are debatable. Now, in the movie The Impossible Spy, the reason we're congregated together today, they have it that Elie wanted to come back and help out with an attack that the Syrians are going to plan on. I've forgotten who. As far as I know, is the only place that story's ever been told. I don't know where Harvey got that story. I guess the BBC got it for him, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
find any trace of that anywhere else. And there's a good lot about the story of Elie Cohen that is, well, you say accurate. I don't know how accurate you can be when you don't really know. But right, there's different opinions on things.
Yeah.
Nadia thought that he wanted to come home. Masasa said, no, no, he wants to stay in. And as far as they were concerned, he was too valuable. God, he'd been there 4 years, sending him daily reports on everything the Syrian government was doing.
Yes.
They were in the know. And at the same time, I think, and just from the sources that I have read, and this could be debatable, is that he got really enthralled with his life in Damascus. He was flying the high life. He was lining up gangs of prostitutes in his apartment to get all the Syrian elites to come over and tell him stuff. And he was living the high life, no question about it.
Yeah.
Also think, I know this is debatable because just this last week, right after the story of all those artifacts being returned, there was some commentator on it says, well, I know there's a lot of people out there who say that Elie got cocky and he was transmitting too much, which is what the Mossad said, that he got himself trapped because he just wouldn't get off the radio keys, which is what made it easy
Mm-hmm.
for the Syrians using Soviet technology to find him. And that guy says, no, I don't think that was it. But, well, maybe not, but that's the best stories that I have heard. But again, it's controversial. What's factual? What's actual? Well, that's quite debatable in a lot of things.
Yeah. Now, in the movie that we're going to talk about, and we're talking about now, and then Tom and I are going to dig into a little bit later. So you're saying there is confusion whether or not Elie wanted to go back for one last mission, or whether Mossad was making him go back.
That's the argument. Yeah.
Okay, so there's confusion about that. That's why Nadia, Elie Cohen's
Well,
wife,
that's one
is
of the things. Ever
not
after
close.
Nadia was always very unhappy because she doesn't think Mossad gave him enough credit. They don't praise him enough. They don't laud him enough.
Mm.
Because
Ah,
I guess it was 2019. There was some news story that some guy in Syria was pay me $1 million and I'll help you find Elie Cohen's body. And
oh.
Nadia heard that story and then said, well, why aren't we paying the $1 million for it? I don't know what became of that, but it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
We still don't have his body. I don't even think anybody knows where it is anymore. It's 60 years. It's possible.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, there was an attempt by Mossad to go get it at one point, right? To go get his body, and it failed.
Well,
And
those are another stories. I remember Harvey talked about that, and
yeah.
Maurice talked about that. That supposedly the Mossad sent a team in one time,
Mm-hmm.
get the body, and a barking dog alerted the people around, so they had to escape, and they weren't able to get it, so they moved the body. And I've read reports they moved the body 3 times
Mm.
that the Mossad couldn't get it. Now that's true or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've
All
seen it.
right.
I've seen a similar story about that too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You were talking about how Elie got cocky and that he seemed to really enjoy that life. I thought that came out in the movie,
Yeah, it
because
did.
Yeah, I
in
do
the
too. Yeah,
in the movie, Eli Wallach's character is trying to convince him to stop spying,
yeah, that's
Yes.
right.
and Ellie's kind of like, I'm going back. I'm needed or whatever. And the way he was saying it kind of sounded like I'm enjoying doing this.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that was a good take because remember the research of that movie came from the BBC. That was one of the two things Harvey said that really made it possible. One was he got
Yes.
hooked up with the BBC, and the second was he got permission from the Israeli government to do the movie, like nobody else had been able to do before.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, yeah, he wanted to go back. It's really just not, he wanted to come home and be with me and the kids, and maybe he was conflicted about that. I don't know. But
Mm-hmm.
everything I have found suggests that he was enjoying himself.
We're never gonna know, really, are we?
How can we?
Yeah.
That's part of the spy world, right? And there's a lot of
Uh,
secrecy in things, and you get different opinions, and then what do you do?
Yeah. I mean,
especially if you hung the main guy, where are you going to get the story from?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, the compelling part of this story is that this is real spy stuff. This isn't James Bond or Mission Impossible. I mean, this is how the life of a real spy may be. This is
And a
more,
very, very, very successful spy up until the end.
yeah,
Very few spies get up as high in the government as he did. He was like
yeah,
nominated to be third in line to
yeah.
the Syrian Defense Ministry,
It's
which is
amazing.
astounding.
Yeah, that was crazy.
You could see why he was getting a little cocky, maybe, but
Yeah.
thinking, "Oh, how did I do this?"
Yeah.
Oh,
Man,
he's been
okay,
I
living the high life for a long time
yeah.
because even before
yeah,
he went to Syria, they sent him to Argentina to get his cover set
right,
as a Syrian businessman. And he got to start working with the Syrian elites in Argentina because there was quite a colony, I guess you could say, of,
yeah. So
exiles.
that created the backstory they needed for him to do the spying in Syria and all that, right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've got another question. We were just talking about the fact that we have two different stories as to the last mission. There was also some discrepancy I've read, and in fact, in the six-part series called The Spy,
Yeah.
there was the story of how he got the information about the Golan Heights and then
Uh,
gave the information to the Israelis. In the movie The Impossible Spy, they show him on a topographical
yeah.
map or model or whatever, putting
3D model.
pins in, saying
Yeah.
where these guns were in the Golan Heights. In the series The Spy, and I've also read this online, the soldiers that were guarding the guns were pretty much out in the sun, and he supposedly felt bad for them or pretended to feel bad for them and had them plant trees that he paid for to help give them some shade, and then it made it easy to go in and bomb where the trees were. And
I hadn't heard the idea that he bought the eucalyptus trees. What I have always heard was that he put them there, as like you just said, as a means for the Israeli Defense Forces to find the bunkers. And
Yeah.
how important that was is kind of controversial because there's a whole lot of people who believe because he was able to show the Israelis where all these bunkers were, that they were able to quickly take them out in 2 days in the 6 Day War. And there's a lot of us, well, there's a lot more to it than that. There was a lot of other surveillance. There's a lot more intel coming in beyond Elie Cohen. Plus, there's a lot that says, well, wait a minute, you got to give the Army and the Air Force credit here because they set up massive units. They knew where to go. That's where Elie helped out. But I mean, there's a lot of people who deserve a lot of credit for taking the gold.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Well, Wes, Tom and I have done similar episodes on movies like Razzi, which is the story of real Indian and Pakistani spies and what transpired. Here, we've kind of gone over the storyline of Elie Cohen a bit and how important these real events were to Israel at that time. When you're just saying with how successful it was in terms of basically shortening the war to a 6 day war. Could you tell us more about how the research was done? What the BBC had to do with the research? Was that validated? Was it looking good? Like, did everyone say to Harvey, "Hey, that you've got the BBC behind you. This you're credible now"? How did that work?
He got a script together,
Hmm.
sent the script to the BBC, and then the BBC does whatever they do in their offices. And they came back with what they had at the time. And that's another thing you got to realize with the Elie Cohen story is every time you turn around, there's some new development. For example, when we met with Maurice, Harvey had never heard of him before. All their research for the movie, as it because now Maurice was also a Mossad agent, except he worked in the code room and he was decoding the information that was coming in from Ellie, but he didn't know it was his brother. So
Yes.
one particular missive where there's a couple words that, I know
Oh,
who that is. And then he accosted Eli the next time he came in for one of his visits. But, Harvey had never heard that story before. Nobody in the BBC knew about it before because Maurice hadn't told anybody before.
hmm.
There's something different, something new. Every time you turn around, it seems like.
Yeah. They're saying basically from everything you look at and so on that fundamentally the movie, The Impossible Spy, is not only based on a true story, but fundamentally they got it right.
Fundamentally, yes, I did. Yes.
And so we think that that's true, right? So
Oh,
fundamentally, if
yeah.
you watch this movie, The Impossible Spy,
More than once.
yeah, more than one. Most of what you see, uh, individual words and line, of course, that's hard to validate, but the storyline itself is fundamentally true, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think in just about.
Okay.
I know there's been some debate because in the opening scenes, he and his brother are watching the execution of some spies in Egypt. And I've
Yes.
heard the people say that couldn't have happened. They couldn't have gotten to that city. Or was it Alexandria? I can't remember. Well, I don't know. That's something that they found that the LA talked about at some point. So
Hmm.
probably it did happen, but
Well, that's where they said the character they're calling Yakov saw Ellie first, and that Ellie was supposedly one of three people, and they only caught two of them, and they hung two of them, and that's whose hanging
Yeah.
he was at.
Right, right, right.
there
Yeah.
were different stories about espionage in Egypt that LA supposedly had some kind. The Laven affair was the one you're talking about,
Yeah.
and there's one before that. I can't remember the name of the something affair where they were basically helping Jews escape to Israel. Supposedly he was involved in that, but what we don't know. Uh, Maybe stuff in those files that Syria just sent to Israel. I don't know. In
Mhm.
the my files, there's a thing of Ellie's curriculum vitae that he gave to the Mossad when they signed him up, indicating that he had done this stuff in Egypt, but he didn't give any details that I know of.
Mhm.
But if it's true, it foreshadows a lot of what would happen when he went to Syria.
Okay.
Brother Abraham certainly thought he was involved in the Laban affair and other things because it took Ellie a lot. The rest of his family moved from Egypt to Israel. Oh, I don't know, 1948. There, that's about when I got started, and he took a long time to get there. It was like he had work to do in Egypt. So odds are
Right.
good that he had his fingers involved in things and was lucky enough not to get sapped.
Yeah, yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Wow.
All right. Now,
I,
Wes, you've written about a lot of spy movies, not just The Impossible Spy. And in The Impossible Spy, we just talked about the whole thing in the Golan Heights where he got some information. And they talk about a dilemma of how do we act on this without giving away that we got this information from Ellie. And we've seen that in multiple movies. And probably the
Oh
biggest
yeah.
one would be The Imitation Game, where it's we cracked the Enigma code. How do we act on this without the Germans knowing we cracked it? And so are there other spy movies you can think of where that theme of we've got this information but we don't know what to do with it that
Well, not
you
only in spy movies, in spy reality.
yeah
For
yeah.
example, Churchill, forget he let that one town get bombed because he didn't want
Yes.
the Germans to know. I forgot the name of the town.
I, I know
Let
what
them
you're
bomb
talking
it.
about.
Yeah, because they didn't want the Germans to know that they knew. And there's all that controversy about the Cuban Missile Crisis.
hmm
When are we going to let them know that we know? You
right
know,
Yes.
that's been a big part of espionage, I guess, forever.
well even in this movie they he got the information about the kibbutz that was going to get bombed
Right.
and you know
That's the one I question.
yeah
Yes. Right. Right.
do you act on it or not
Yeah.
We had talked about this before a little bit. I think others have tried to make this movie. Harvey Chertok was able to make the movie, but what? How did he circumvent all of the roadblocks that stopped all these other people from making The Impossible Spy?
Well, like I said earlier, getting the BBC on board was a huge hurdle because it gave him a
Right.
whole lot of credibility. So that when he went to the Israeli government, he could say, "We got this, we got this," and he presented Ellie in a light that the Israelis like. Because for
Okay.
them, Elie Cohen is a major, major hero. And so they kind of really want a really idealized edition. That's where I think that kibbutz they came in was that gave him a
Hmm.
kind of glorified mission to do to finish off his career with.
Mhm.
And whether it happened or not, um,
Yeah. Hell of a way to finish.
that's one thing that's always been kind of interesting to me is all of these years Israel has been complaining and complaining that Syria wouldn't return the body because he's such a great hero. Well, he's a great hero to Israel, but if you're a Syrian, he's a monster.
Yes. Right. Absolutely.
exact opposite side. Why would they want to cooperate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, every spy, that's the way it is. They think they're right and they're doing it for their country and their country is
Yeah.
right. And it doesn't matter which side you're on, if you're Indian or Pakistani, Syrian, Israeli, you always think you're right because that's that's why you're doing what you're doing.
I think
So,
another aspect to Elie is right before Mossad signed him, he was getting seriously bored. His
mm,
wife talks about that. He was doing this accountancy work and different things, and his spirits are really, really low because he wasn't using his talents.
yeah.
And Mossad came calling, and ding dong, here's
Yeah.
my life's mission. Here's my purpose. Here I'm going to go.
Yeah. But didn't
Yeah.
he resist it at first? He did, right? He didn't automatically
In the
say, yeah.
movie, in the movie, he
Well, in the
does.
movie, I mean, they're saying this is accurate. And from what we've read in other areas, that they said he wasn't like overwhelmed and saying, "Yeah, oh sure, sign me up," right? I mean,
Uh, I don't know. Well, mostly what I've seen was that he was delighted. Um, he was a bit burned out by, I gather, his treatment in Egypt. And I don't remember the particulars,
mhm.
but it didn't take them long to draw him in. Um, I can recall. But again,
Right?
everything about the Elie Cohen story, there's more than one angle to
Yes, there always is, right? Uh, if you could say one thing to spy movie fans that sets apart The Impossible Spy from any of the other movies, whether they're fiction or real, what do you think that would be?
it's how human, not just Ellie, but all of the characters are. It is a really emotional, poignant story of real people doing real things that made an impact that lasts to this very day. As we were talking about earlier about the artifacts being returned and all that.
Hmm.
Nobody remembers back in '65 when Syria was planning to execute him. There was an international outcry to get Syria to spare his life. The
Yes.
Pope, presidents, prime ministers, and all over the world, people were saying, don't, because the normal craft was to trade, a caught spy. You don't kill him.
Yeah.
But no, no, no. Ellie got executed. But
Yeah.
again, what he accomplished and his place in spy history is just unique. I can't think of anybody else in real spycraft that accomplished what he did and left a legacy that he did.
Well,
Yeah.
and you think about the embarrassment to the Syrian
Yeah,
government. I mean, if
That he was third in line.
that he was third in, I mean, it's like, or he was almost third in line.
almost. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of like,
Almost. Yeah.
yeah, you embarrassed the heck out of me. I can't keep you around.
Yeah. That is a poignant part in the movie when they do that and the guy nods like, yeah, go ahead. Do it. Hang him.
Yeah, you were my
It's,
friend, but
yeah,
not really.
but you can't do this. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
You're right. That is a very poignant scene in the movie, I think.
Yeah. Oof.
yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's heart tugging. And you're hoping that, hey, come on. Yeah. But no.
Well, and it asks the question we ask all the time, Dan, is what would you do if you were in that situation?
Yeah.
Right? If you were sitting there going like, okay, you just betrayed me. I just caught you that you've betrayed me and everything you've told me has been a lie, but
Hmm.
I still feel like I'm a friend, really friends with you
Yeah.
and I'm in power. What would you do?
And even in the movie, he kind of gives him a chance to get out at the end there when visits him in the jail in prison,
Yeah.
and he says, "Could you ever see yourself as an Arab or something like that?" He says
Yeah.
to him, or Syrian or whatever, and he said, "I'm a Jew,"
Yeah.
and that was it. That was the end of okay. I can't save your life anymore. That's it. You're done. Yeah, it's a heck of a movie because it's fundamentally true, and this
It
stuff
was
really
well done. You got to give Harvey a lot of credit for doing excellent execution of it, his casting of it, his
gets.
filming of it, and everything else. He's spot on.
Yep, yeah, absolutely. So, Wes, if people want to find out more, they should head to SpyWiseSecretDossier.com, right?
That's the place.
Yeah, go see Wes's website. It's fantastic. He's got a lot of detail there.
Now, before we finish this, Wes, I wanted to thank you for writing Beyond Bond, Spies in Fiction and Film. I'm holding it right now. And On Screen and Undercover, the ultimate book of movie espionage. Dan and I, our podcast is all about spy movies, not just James Bond. And so you've been an invaluable resource for us in like, what movies should we do? And let's figure out what to talk about those movies. So I want to thank you for that.
Yeah. Wes, we want to thank you for providing all of this background information for us on this important spy movie. Tom and I are going to dig in a little bit now and do our decoding session on the rest of the movie and so on, but with your insight to guide us. So we appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much, Wes.
Well, thank you.
All right, Tom and I are going into our decoding session now in this movie with a little more detail than we covered with Wes, but we got a nice background. So, to many Israelis, Elie Cohen is held in very high regard even today. His work leading up to the Six-Day War in 1967 was very important for the Israeli victory. The Impossible Spy is a dramatic telling of his story, and there is a lot here that feels very familiar to us.
That's right, Dan. And as I was watching it, I got some more familiarity, and I mentioned it to Wes here.
Yeah.
Two things came to mind. First thing is I'm watching this thing going, I know this story, but why?
Yeah.
And then I remembered the 2019 miniseries, The Spy, starring Sacha Baron Cohen, that we mentioned with Wes. Now, that was a 6-episode telling of this story. So I'd seen it before, but it was presented differently in that. I mean, they had 6 hours to work with. And I think both the Impossible Spy movie and the series, The Spy, were very, very solid tellings of this story.
Yeah. And the second thing I'm sure that comes to mind is something we already mentioned with Wes, was the Razzi movie with the Pakistanis
Absolutely,
and the Indian spies. So
it felt very, very much. So what I don't know is, did they kind of structure Razzi based on the Impossible Spy? Because in both Razzi and the Impossible Spy, we've got different real life people from different countries, but a lot of their stories are very similar. How they get caught is very similar. And supposedly both of those are accurate with that.
Yeah.
How they were trained and stuff like that are very similar in the two movies. So I wonder if Razzi was built on the structure of the Impossible Spy, yet telling Samat's story instead of Elie Cohen's.
It could be. And then you see some scenes here that could have been pulled from other spy movies and so on. We'll mention that as well. All right, so we're going to talk about the basic plot of the Impossible Spy and Elie Cohen, because that needs to be done. Elie Cohen was recruited by Mossad and is sent to live with and assimilate himself and infiltrate the Ba'ath Party. He started out in Argentina and then moved to Damascus after establishing his bona fides. So this is basically his backstory that they created in Argentina. So he's a reluctant spy, according to the movie, telling the Mossad no a few times as they tried to recruit him. Now, Wes was thinking, hey, maybe he wasn't so against it because he was bored with his life. We don't know. I mean, we're never. But the movie says, hey, he said no a few times. We've talked about the importance of reluctant spies in a whole bunch of episodes. Movies like The 39 Steps, North by Northwest, The Man Who Knew Too Much, and many, many more. They have the same kind of theme, a reluctant spy. So if indeed he was a reluctant spy here, kind of fits in with some of the other elements. Now, one difference here, though, from those other movies is that once Elie Cohen accepts the job, he goes through a lot of training, and it's for real. And he was given a lot of money to spend and held many parties with a lot of liquor and prostitutes and so on. Wes mentioned that as well. This got him in very closely with the Syrian officials and the military in Syria, etc. Cohen was married with a small child at the time, so there's a gripping side story about the toll of his travels on his marriage. And much of this movie shows us Cohen's life in Syria. This movie was well received on its release and won an HBO Cable Ace Award for Best Picture.
All right, so let's move on to the themes of The Impossible Spy. I mean, first, there's a strong theme around sacrifice and duty. I mean, this is a spy. And if you think about what Elie does here, he does for his country. He almost ruins his marriage.
Yeah.
He rarely sees his children. Now, in the movie, they only show the one child. He had 3. Mm-hmm. And he puts himself in harm's way very often. Yes. But like Wes was saying, he seemed to enjoy the setting up people and the parties and the prostitutes a lot. So I thought that was, kind of interesting.
The whole theme of deception and identity is strong in this movie as well. And it isn't just the fact that Elie takes on a different persona. He turns into a different person when he's spying. And you can see that in the movie. And it probably was like that in real life. We see a bit of the psychological toll this takes on him throughout the movie as well.
Can you imagine going back home to your wife after being this, whatever you want to call his role, in his spy role in Syria, and then coming back to his wife and having to switch on and off who he is, and then going back to Syria and, okay, I got to go back to the other role now.
Because we have to say, his wife didn't know what he was really doing either. She thought he was buying weapons for Israel from a bunch of different countries, that he worked for the Department of Defense, and that was what he was supposed to be doing.
Well,
so she had no idea.
That's what she was told.
Right, that's what she was told. So, all right, another theme is the political intrigue of Middle Eastern geopolitics. Here in the USA, we don't get a lot of the Middle Eastern history taught to us. So this movie educates us, not just on the intelligence operations, but on how this part of the world works. And I think there's another theme around moral ambiguity here, too. We see the need for espionage, for sure. But where is the line between heroism and manipulation? What are the moral dilemmas Elie has to face? And he faces a lot of them. But you know what? Ultimately, he makes the decision rather easily what he needs to do. So even though there's moral ambiguity, I think he gets over that pretty fast.
Yeah, I agree with you. All right, so that's kind of the themes of the movie. So let's dive into the positive and few negative aspects of this movie. Yeah. And what movies this may have either been influenced by or had influenced.
Yeah.
And I'm going to start with the cast, which we often do.
Cast was fantastic.
Yeah, Elie Cohen is played by John Shea, and he turns in an excellent performance as Elie. And I've looked at some of the pictures of Elie Cohen, and it's amazing how they got Shea to look like Cohen.
Very much.
Very much.
Yeah.
And I like how Shea plays this role. Cohen is quiet, yet able to have big parties with much alcohol consumption. He's portrayed as being able to keep things level. He's often quite serious. He realizes why he's there and that he's got a mission. And I think Shea makes this very believable and portrays the right amount of composed control and letting it hang out a bit. And I also love how he interacts with, how Shea, the actor, interacts with Ellie's wife, Nadja. Those scenes and the way he performs those, I think they're excellent. You feel
very
for
believable.
Both characters, and it really well done.
Yeah.
Superman fans will know John Shea as Lex Luthor in the TV series Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman, and he also played Blair's father, Harold Waldorf, on the series Gossip Girl.
Again, we're saying this is not a documentary. This is a docudrama. So they have actors playing these roles. Eli Wallach, not surprisingly, turns in a very strong performance as Yakov.
Yeah, he always does.
Yeah, he's Elie Cohen's handler, boss, manager, whatever you want to call him. His role is one of stern direction, but he has a very humanitarian side to him. His interactions with Elie and Nadia are very different, and Wallach just nails this. He's terrific.
Yeah, and I want to jump in on one thing here. We're calling him Yakov because that's the name in the movie.
In the movie, right.
Wes called him something different, right? The real name. So one of the things they put up is that, they've changed the names, that whole, we've changed the names to protect the innocent.
But not Eli, not Elie Cohen's name.
Not Elie Cohen's name, but the rest of the characters, except for Nadia, his wife, they changed the names.
All right, the third character we want to call out is General Halib, played by Sasan Gabay. He is part of the Ba'ath Party, and Ellie's finances helped Halib climb the ranks. So Gabay plays this role well and is quite believable. His reaction when he finds out the truth about Elie is very good and very revealing. His face tells it all.
Yeah, I just can't imagine finding out you've been duped like he had been.
Yeah.
That just, and
duped well. To the highest.
And Gabay just plays that really, you kind of feel for him, right? He's the enemy, but you feel for him. The enemy, the enemy, the way the movie portrays it.
Yeah.
Right. All right. And then finally we have Ellie's wife, Nadia, played by Michal Bat Adam. Now, she plays this role perfectly, in my opinion.
She's good.
Imagine being a wife whose husband takes a job supposedly buying arms, and she doesn't know that he works for the Mossad. He's
Right.
gone all the time. She has a baby and goes 6 months to a year without seeing her husband while she's raising this child. And I think that her portrayal of the interactions between Nadia and Elie when he does come home is 100% believable because there's the, I'm glad you're home, but can you stay and do something for a
Yeah.
while?
Yeah.
I
Right.
mean,
He was gone months and months at a time.
yeah. And
Sometimes I think at one point she said she saw him twice in a year.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
so you
Yeah.
feel for her, and much of that is because of Badam's performance.
Yeah. Okay, the next positive we want to highlight is the historical significance of this true story. Elie Cohen's work helped Israel shorten a war with Syria to a 6-day war. He gave the Israelis a lot of intelligence that gave them a leg up over the Arabs. This heightens the significance of this story. Britannica.com says that his work is remembered as one of the most daring and productive intelligence gathering operations in Israeli history. Whoa. It's compelling, in part because much of it is true. We see the Arab-Israeli conflict in a Cold War setting. We get to see how espionage was handled back then. It isn't much different than what we see in other spy movies from the time, but in this case, there is truth to it, and a lot of truth.
Now, Dan, you said much of this is true. And we talked about with Wes the whole thing about there's a difference of opinion on some of this stuff.
Right.
Including what he did with the information, how in the movie they don't show the eucalyptus trees. So even though they're telling the same story, the story changes a bit depending on who you talk to.
Yes.
The general concept, though, of him being involved in identifying the information is accurate.
Yeah.
How it was actually done was not exactly clear.
Hence a docudrama, not a documentary. The final positive we'll talk about is the tension that this movie builds. The higher into the Ba'ath Party Elie gets, the stakes get higher as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He earned the absolute trust of General Halib, which is how Elie gets access to the things he does. So, this movie does a good job of letting that tension build up as it comes to its conclusion. Elie puts himself in harm's way a lot of times. And I think this movie shows us some of the dangers of being a real spy, not a movie spy.
Oh, I agree. And think about the fact that when they hired him, right, they knew they had a guy who was sympathetic and that was smart, but I'm sure he way excelled what they were expecting out of him.
Yeah, Mossad, well, they say it over and over again in the movie that he is way beyond anything they thought he'd be able to do.
Yeah.
Now, let's look at a couple of the issues that we have with the movie. Pacing. Well, okay. Yeah, really? You're going to talk about pacing for this movie as well? Because we have to.
Because it's in every movie. Some people think this movie drags a bit, but it's only an hour and 36 minutes. And to me, it didn't feel like it dragged. But I've read that criticism about the movie The Impossible Spy, so we'll call it out, but I'm not sure I agree with it.
Yeah. The story builds, and it builds meticulously, but that's part of building the story. Now, interestingly, another criticism is that some people thought that there wasn't enough depth shown for Elie. They wanted to see more, especially with his personal struggles and his interactions with his wife, Nadia. So they didn't think the depth of Elie's character came out as much as it should have. I think this is somewhat correct, but trying to get all that Elie did in the few short years he was active into an hour and 36 minutes had to come into play here. Yeah, maybe they add another 9 or 10 minutes to the movie and to add the depth, but was it needed? I'm not sure. But I get the point. I thought there was just enough of it, though.
Well, we also have to remember this was a made-for-TV movie, so you do have time constraints on that.
Yeah, and budget constraints. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and for me, like I say, the parts with the wife, with him and Nadia, were fantastic. They were focused. They were focused on her, not on him. So yes, there wasn't quite as much character development around him because when she was in it, it was really we were seeing her viewpoint. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was a great way to play it because she could showcase this struggle of the relationship succinctly. And we didn't need to see much of Elie's viewpoint here because it was really the struggle of I've got a married couple and the wife's not happy.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? And in many spy movies, the spies aren't married in part because of these challenges. And maybe they just don't want to show them because it takes time. And it gives us the conflict from the spouse's viewpoint. And that really worked well for me.
Yeah.
Now, another criticism of this movie was about its production values. This was a made-for-TV movie. It didn't have the huge budget like James Bond or many
Yeah, no.
theatrical released movies. So the action is muted and the explosions and firepower aren't as big as what we see in the theatrical release. But again, this was a made-for-TV movie.
Yeah, and it didn't need to be.
Yeah.
The story is not that. The story is him as a spy and what really happens. And Wes told us what really happens. So, yeah. The last criticism we're going to call out here is to do with predictability. There aren't the big surprises or twists we get in many of the spy movies because this is not fiction. You can make up all kinds of stuff in fiction. And some people have criticized this movie for it. Well, Elie Cohen's story is fairly well known. It's hard to show the true story stuff that many people already know and add some twists to it. Now, a lot of times they do that kind of stuff. When they remake movies, they do a lot of that too. They change the story and so on. And we have to remember, a lot of what is represented in this movie has been well researched. It is a true story, fundamentally, that has been widely known, been in newspapers, there's books written about it and so on. So this kind of predictability, I'm fine with. It's not like a fictional spy story and having things predictable. I mean, this is like a Titanic movie.
Yeah.
You know the end.
You know the boat goes down.
Yeah, you're still compelled to watch the movie, and you're going to be compelled to watch this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I had the same criticism. I'm watching this thing, and as we get to the ending, it's kind of like, okay, I know where this is going. Well, yeah, of course I know where it's going. It's a real story. You know?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so for me, that really, okay, yeah, there's some predictability there because it's based on reality, and that's how life works.
Yep.
And, a big part of that is because he goes back for one more mission.
There's always one too many missions in spy movies, so you could guess where this is going. I mean, they did everything but tell you what was coming up. And then when the final scene comes up, you kind of knew that was going to happen. It was predictable. Wes said it, what they did. They hung the guy. I mean, we didn't have to say it.
Well, and the irony of this predictability was Wes talked about the fact that, well, either Elie wanted to go on this other mission and the Mossad didn't, or the Mossad pushed him into it. Either way, the ending was predictable because it was like, you're going back for one last mission. And regardless of who did it, you're going to have the predictability there because it's the last mission.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you knew it wasn't going to end well for Elie. They set us up for that, and they showed us that in graphic detail. All right, now let's move on to some of the influencers. Are there other movies that influenced The Impossible Spy or that The Impossible Spy has influenced? Since this movie is based on fact, this isn't going to be a long list, but we can point out some similarities that we see. The first is the use of the reluctant spy that we've already called out. The second is that Elie is given cyanide to take if things don't go well. Well, we see this in many spy movies, so there is realism here, but showing it as they did makes this one common trope we see in many spy movies. But in fairness, the trope is a trope because cyanide was indeed used and issued to spies. So that's why it's a trope.
Now, another thing I think that was influenced by the James Bond series had to do with gadgets. Now, Elie doesn't get a bunch of really cool gadgets. He gets recording devices, Morse code transmitter, the cyanide pills, and a couple other things.
Yeah.
But it's the way they showed this scene that actually made me laugh while I watched it. And I only laughed because of recognition. This scene reminded me so much of Desmond Llewellyn's Q taking James Bond into the Q lab. The way they did this, and the matter of fact, this is this, and you need to do this, felt so Q-like to me that I felt that scene had to be influenced by Bond.
Okay, all right. I didn't laugh too much in this movie.
Well, no, but it was just when the way he's going through it and describing it. Oh, that's Q. There was also a line from Nadja that I bet you smiled at. You said you didn't smile much.
Yeah.
But one of your favorite lines in any James Bond movie is from License to Kill. Nadja says of Elie's supposed job buying arms for the Israelis, quote, "If you're buying for the Defense Department, you're guaranteed a job for life." Dan, they don't say the next line, but how would you or James Bond finish that line?
You just don't know how long that life will be. Oh, man. All right. You have to love Sanchez. He was great in License to Kill. But, all right. So The Impossible Spy is about real people and real life and death. I also think that The Impossible Spy may have influenced ROTC. And Elie has to set up his Morse code transmitter and antenna to try to keep it undetected. In ROTC, Samad Khan has to do the same thing. And again, in reality, both spies had this challenge, but it was nice to see the parallel. And in both movies, the Morse code proved problematic.
We also get movies like Munich and Operation Finale, which both show the Mossad in real-world espionage operations. We're not sure that The Impossible Spy influenced those two movies, but there are similarities.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been a lot of good spy movies which have been based on true stories. So we have Bridge of Spies, Munich, Zero Dark 30, The Catcher Was a Spy, Argo, Operation Finale, Breach, and more. We haven't covered many of them in our podcast. So are there any that you'd like us to decode? Let us know.
Yeah, and I think that Dr. Wesley Britton, who we just talked to, said in the research that was done that the Impossible Spy name came in part from the popularity at the time of the TV show Mission Impossible, actually. So
that makes sense.
Yeah. Now, as of this recording, this movie, The Impossible Spy, is available on Prime Video and on YouTube. All right, so let's wrap this up with each of us giving our high-level thoughts on The Impossible Spy.
Yeah, I like this movie a lot, and I think that's because I like to see spy movies based on real events, right? I like that realism that sometimes James Bond and Mission Impossible ignore. I like the acting in this one. I love the interaction between Elie and Nadia, and I would recommend this movie with a caveat. If you only like spy movies with big action sequences, The Impossible Spy might not be for you. But if you like a spy story, especially one based on reality, it's a good watch. It's only an hour and 36 minutes, and I would definitely watch this. I would also say that I like the miniseries The Spy, which tells the same story, but in 6 45-minute to 1 hour episodes. I think that extra time helps with showing the magnitude of what Elie did, but The Impossible Spy is a really good telling of this story.
Yeah. And I think it's a well-directed movie by Jim Goddard, well-acted, based on real serious events with real serious consequences. So I'm not judging this as a movie only. It does reflect the real world of spying in compelling and chilling ways. Definitely watch it. And it was great to have Dr. Wesley Britton with us today to help us frame this discussion. So check out his website, SpyWiseSecretDossier.com. All right, that's a wrap of our decoding of the movie, The Impossible Spy. This has been Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. You can help us keep going by subscribing right now in your favorite podcast app. Thanks for spending time with us. We appreciate it.